Jake Martinez floated in the pilot's seat of his salvage ship, the Wanderer, watching the stars drift past the viewport. He'd been working the outer rim for 3 years now, picking through the wreckage that war always left behind. But the pay was good, and more importantly, he could work alone. After what happened on Earth, being alone felt safer. The ship's scanner beeped softly. Jake looked at the screen and saw a small blip moving slowly through space. It was too small to be a military vessel, but too big to be debris. He changed course to investigate. In this business, you never knew what might be valuable. As he got closer, Jake could see it was definitely a ship, but not human design. The hull was smooth and curved, with strange symbols painted along the sides. It was Zephyrian, no doubt about it. The enemy. Jake's hands hesitated over the controls.
Finding
Enemy ships was supposed to be reported to Colonial Defense immediately. That was the law. But something about this ship looked wrong. It was drifting without power, no lights, no movement, dead in space. He opened a communication channel. Unknown vessel. This is salvage operator Jake Martinez. Do you need assistance? He waited. No response. Tried again in basic trade language. Still nothing. Jake made his decision. He would board the ship and take a quick look. If there were valuable salvage materials, he could claim them legally since the ship appeared abandoned. If there were survivors, well, he would deal with that when it happened. The Wanderer's docking arm extended and clamped onto the alien ship's hull. Jake put on his environmental suit and checked his sidearm. It dealt with Zephyrians before. During his military days, they were tall, strong, and did not like humans very much. But this ship seemed empty. The airlock opened with a soft hiss. Jake stepped inside and immediately noticed the smell. Death had a particular odor that was the same across all species. Turned on his helmet light and moved deeper into the ship. The first body he found was in the corridor. A Zephyrian male, tall and lean, with the typical gray-blue skin and angular features. He had been dead for several days. Jake continued forward, finding more bodies as he went. The entire crew appeared to be dead. Jake reached what looked like the bridge. 3 more bodies sat at their stations. But something was strange. None of them showed signs of battle damage. No wounds, no scorch marks from energy weapons. They looked like they had simply died at their posts. He accessed the ship's computer system using a universal translator device. The logs were in Zephyrian, but the device slowly converted them to basic English.
What?
Jake Reed made his blood run cold. The ship was called the Silent Honor. It had been carrying prisoners of war back to Zephyrian space when something went wrong. According to the logs, one of the crew members had done something that violated their honor code. Punishment. The entire ship had been abandoned by their own fleet and left to die in space. Jake continued reading. The crew member who had caused the problem was someone called Lyra. She had shown mercy to human prisoners during a battle. In Zephyrian culture, this was considered a serious crime. The logs said she had been locked in the cargo hold to die slowly, while the rest of the crew was left to starve. Jake felt sick. He had heard stories about Zephyrian honor codes, but this was worse than he had imagined. They had left their own people to die because one person had shown kindness to enemies. He made his way to the cargo hold. The door was sealed, but his cutting tools made short work of the lock. Inside, the air was stale and cold. Jake's light swept across the empty space until it stopped on a figure huddled in the far corner. It was a Zephyrian, smaller than the others he had seen. Female, he thought, though it was hard to tell with their species. She was barely breathing, her gray-blue skin pale and sickly. Her clothes were torn and dirty. She had been left here to die alone. Jake knelt beside her and checked for a pulse. It was weak, but steady. She was alive, but barely. Her eyes opened slightly when his light hit her face. They were large and dark, filled with fear and pain. "Easy," Jake said softly, though he doubted she understood English. "I'm not going to hurt you." She tried to move away from him, but she was too weak. Jake could see she was dehydrated and probably hadn't eaten in days. If he left her here, she would be dead within hours. Jake stood up and considered his options. The smart thing would be to report the ship to Colonial Defense and Let them handle it. The Zephyrian was an enemy alien. Helping her could be considered treason. At best, he would lose his salvage license. At worst, he could face criminal charges. But as he looked down at the dying girl, Jake remembered why he had left the military in the first place. He had seen too much cruelty, too much unnecessary death. He had promised himself that he would never again stand by and watch someone die when he could help. Jake activated his emergency medical kit and gave the Zephyrian an injection of basic nutrients and fluids. She was too weak to resist. Then he wrapped her in a thermal blanket and carefully lifted her in his arms. She weighed less than he expected. Carrying her back to the Wanderer, Jake tried not to think about what he was doing. He was violating about a dozen laws and regulations. If anyone found out his life as he knew it would be over. But he could not leave her to die alone in that cold cargo hold. Jake placed the unconscious Zephyrian in the Wanderer's small medical bay and activated the life support systems. The ship's computer scanned her vital signs and began providing basic medical care. She would live, at least for now. He returned to the Silent Honor and downloaded all the ship's logs and data files. If he was going to help this alien, he needed to understand what had happened to her and why her own people had left her to die. Back on the Wanderer, Jake set course away from the area. He needed time to think and plan. The Zephyrian girl was still unconscious, but her vital signs were improving. The medical bay was keeping her stable. Jake sat in his pilot chair and reviewed the downloaded files. The more he read, the more disgusted he became. Lyra had been a junior officer on a Zephyrian warship. During a battle with human forces, she had prevented the execution of captured human prisoners. According to Zephyrian law, this was an act of dishonor that contaminated her entire society. Shipped, rather than simply court-martial her, the Zephyrian fleet had decided to make an example. The entire crew of the Silent Honor had been exiled and left to die in space. They had suffered and died because one young officer had chosen mercy over cruelty. Jake looked back toward the medical bay where Lyra lay recovering. She had risked everything to save human lives, and her own people had condemned her for it. Now she was alone in the universe, with nowhere to go and no one to help her, except him. Jake Martinez had always believed that a person's worth was measured by their actions, not their species or nationality. This young Zephyrian had proven herself to be more honorable than her entire fleet. She deserved a chance to live. He knew the risks. He knew what could happen if he was caught harboring an enemy. Alien. But as Jake looked out at the stars, he felt something he had not experienced in years. He felt like he was doing something that mattered. The Wanderer flew deeper into the outer rim, carrying its unlikely passengers toward an uncertain future. Behind them, the Silent Honor continued its endless drift through the darkness. A tomb for those who had died because honor had become more important than humanity. 3 days had passed since Jake brought the Zephyrian girl aboard his ship. He had been hiding in an asteroid field, keeping the Wanderer powered down to minimal levels. The ship's scanners were set to passive mode, watching for any sign of patrol vessels from either side. Lyra was finally awake. She had spent the first 2 days unconscious, while the medical bay worked to save her life. When she first opened her eyes and saw Jake, she had tried to attack him with her bare hands. She was too weak to do any real damage, but the fear in her eyes told Jake everything he needed to know about how Zephyrians viewed humans. Now she sat in the corner of the small medical room, watching him with suspicious dark eyes. Jake had tried to communicate with her using the ship's translation system, but she refused to speak. She would accept food and water when he brought them. But she never took her eyes off him. Jake was starting to wonder if he had made a terrible mistake. Maybe the stories about Zephyrian honor were wrong. Maybe she really was just another enemy soldier who would kill him the moment she got strong enough. On the morning of the 4th day, everything changed. Jake was in the ship's small kitchen area, preparing breakfast, when he heard Lyra moving around in the medical bay. He looked through the doorway and saw her standing at the computer terminal, her fingers moving quickly across the alien interface she had somehow accessed. "Hey," Jake said, moving toward her. "You shouldn't be up yet." "What?" the medical system said. "You need more rest." Lyra spun around, pressing her back against the terminal. For a moment, they stared at each other in silence. Then, to Jake's surprise, she spoke. "You are Jake Martinez." Her voice was soft and musical, with an accent Jake had never heard before. The translation system was working. "That's right," Jake said carefully. "And you're Lyra." She nodded slowly. "I have been reading your ship's records. You are not military. You are what humans call a salvage operator." "Yes, then why did you save me?" The question came out like a challenge. "I am Zephyrian. I am your enemy." Jake sat down on a nearby chair, trying to look less threatening. "You were dying. I couldn't just leave you there. But your government teaches that my people are monsters. We're told the same about humans. What do you think?" Jake asked. "Am I a monster?" Lyra was quiet for a long time, studying his face. Finally, she shook her head. "No, you could have killed me while I was unconscious. You could have sold me to your military for money. Instead, you saved my life and asked for nothing in return." Jake felt some of the tension leave his shoulders. "Your people left you too. Die because you saved human prisoners. It doesn't sound like something a monster would do." "It was a violation of the honor code," Lyra said, but her voice lacked conviction. "I was taught that mercy toward enemies is weakness. It brings shame to the entire unit." "Do you believe that?" Lyra looked away. "I used to. Before the battle, I believed everything the elders taught me. But when I saw those human prisoners, when I felt their fear and pain, I could not let them be executed. They were defeated. They posed no threat. Killing them would have been murder, not honor." Jake leaned forward. "You could feel their fear." "Yes." Lyra touched her forehead. "It is a gift, or perhaps a curse. I can sense the emotions of other beings, especially when they are in great distress. During the battle, the human prisoners were terrified. They knew they were going to die. Their fear was so strong it made me sick. Is that common among your people?" "No, very few Zephyrians have this ability. Those who do are usually trained as interrogators or psychological warfare specialists. But I was different. Instead of using the gift to cause pain, I used it to prevent unnecessary suffering." Jake began to understand. "And that made you dangerous to your own people?" "Yes. The honor code teaches that enemies must be shown no mercy. But how can you show no mercy when you can feel exactly what they feel? When you know that beneath their different skin, they have the same hopes and fears as you do?" Lyra walked to the small viewport and looked out at the stars. "My commander said I was contaminated by human weakness. He said that empathy was a disease that would spread to other crew members if I was not dealt with severely. So they decided to kill your entire crew. It was meant to be a lesson. Other ships would see what happened to the Silent Honor and understand the price of showing mercy to enemies." Lyra's voice became bitter. "They were willing to sacrifice 43 loyal soldiers to make their point. Viewport, I'm sorry about your crew. They didn't deserve to die because of politics. Hated me in the end," Lyra said quietly. "As they grew weaker and more desperate, they blamed me for their fate. Perhaps they were right to do so." "No," Jake said firmly. "They died because your leaders cared more about their rigid rules than about the lives of their own people. You saved lives. They chose to end lives. There's a big difference." Lyra turned to look at him. "Why do you care what happens to me? I am nothing to you." Jake thought about the question for a moment. "When I was in the military, I saw a lot of good people die because someone in command made a bad decision. I saw soldiers follow orders that they knew were wrong because they were afraid to stand up and say no. You did what you thought was right, even though you knew it would cost you everything. That takes courage." "Courage," Lyra repeated the word slowly. "In Zephyrian, we have a similar concept. But it only applies to acts of warfare and violence. There is no word for the courage to show mercy. Maybe it's time your people learned one." Before Lyra could respond, the ship's alarm system activated. Jake rushed to the bridge with Lyra close behind him. The scanner screen showed multiple contacts approaching their position. 3 ships, Jake muttered, studying the display. Human, colonial defense vessels. "They must have been tracking my ship's energy signature. Will they arrest you for helping me?" Lyra asked. "Probably, Jake. began powering up the ship's engines. Unless we can get out of here first, where will we go? Your own people hunt you now because of me. Jake looked at her and managed to grin. I know some places where neither humans nor Zephyrians like to go. The Outer Rim has lots of hiding spots if you know where to look. The Wanderer's engines came online, and Jake piloted the ship out of the asteroid field. Behind them, the colonial defense vessels increased speed, trying to close the distance. Jake, Lyra said, watching the pursuing ships on the scanner. I am grateful for what you have done, but perhaps it would be better if you surrendered me to your people. Not sacrifice your life for someone you barely know. Too late for that, Jake replied, concentrating on his flying. Besides, I've been running from one thing or another most of my life. At least this time, I'm running towards something worthwhile. The lead colonial defense ship fired a warning shot across their bow. Jake ignored it and pushed the engines harder. The Wanderer was smaller and more maneuverable than the military vessels, but they had better weapons and more fuel. There is something you should know, Lyra said, as the chase continued. My ability to sense emotions also allows me to interface with computer systems in ways that others cannot. It might be able to help us escape. How? If you can get close to one of those ships, I can disrupt their targeting systems long enough for us to jump to hyperspace? Jake looked at her in surprise. You would help me fight your own people? They are not my people anymore, Lyra said sadly. They made that clear when they left me to die. But you, a human who was supposed to be my enemy, risked everything to save my life. Perhaps it is time I chose which side I really belong on. Jake nodded and changed course, heading directly toward the nearest colonial defense ship. Hold on then. Hey, this is going to get interesting. The Wanderer flew straight toward the colonial defense ship, its engines pushed to maximum power. Jake could see the confusion on the enemy vessel's bridge through his scanner. They had expected him to run away, not attack, Jake said to Lyra. Lyra placed her hands on the ship's control panel. Her eyes closed and her face became very focused. Jake watched in amazement as lights began to flicker across the console in patterns he had never seen before. The ship's computer systems were responding to her in ways that should have been impossible. On the scanner screen, Jake could see the colonial defense ship's weapon systems shutting down and restarting randomly. Their targeting computers were going crazy, unable to lock onto the Wanderer. It is working, Lyra said through gritted teeth. But I cannot hold it for long. Jump to hyperspace now. Jake activated the hyperspace drive, and the Wanderer disappeared from normal space, leaving the confused colonial defense ships behind. They emerged 3 hours later in empty space, far from any known shipping routes. That was incredible, Jake said, looking at Lyra with new respect. Never seen anyone interface with computer systems like that. Lyra slumped in her chair, exhausted. It is not easy. The ship's systems are designed for human minds, not Zephyrian. It was like trying to speak a language I only half understand. But it worked. We got away clean, for now. But they will find us again. Your colonial defense has many ships, and they know what to look for now. Jake nodded grimly. We need to get off the regular space lanes. I know a place where we can hide, but it's going to be a long journey. Over the next several days, Jake piloted the Wanderer through a series of hyperspace jumps, taking routes that only smugglers and pirates used. He was careful to avoid any systems with significant human or Zephyrian presence. During the journey, Jake and Lyra spent long hours talking. Jake learned about Zephyrian culture and their complex honor system. Lyra learned about human concepts of individual freedom and moral choice. Your people value personal decisions over group loyalty, Lyra observed during one of their conversations. This is very different from Zephyrian society. We're taught that the needs of the collective always come before individual desires. Both systems have their problems, Jake replied. Humans can be selfish and divided. But your people took group loyalty to far when they were willing to kill you for showing mercy, perhaps. But without strong social bonds, how do you maintain order? How do you prevent chaos? Jake smiled. We argue a lot. Democracy is messy, but it usually works out in the end. Their peaceful journey was interrupted on the fifth day when the ship's long-range scanners detected multiple contacts ahead of them. Jake changed course immediately, but it was too late. They had been spotted. Zephyrian patrol ships, Jake said, studying the scanner readouts, 3 of them moving fast. Lyra looked at the display and her face went pale. Those aren't regular patrol ships. They're hunter-class vessels, designed for tracking specific targets. They have been sent to find me. How can you tell? The formation they are flying. It is a hunting pattern used when tracking individuals marked for execution. My former people want me dead, Jake. They will not stop until they have completed their mission. Jake felt a cold knot form in his stomach. Can you disrupt their systems like you did with the human ships? Zephyrian technology is different. Okay, I can interface with it more easily, but they will have countermeasures. If they suspect I am aboard your ship, they will have shielded their critical systems. The Zephyrian ships spread out, trying to surround the Wanderer. Jake pushed his engines to full power, but the Hunter-class vessels were faster and more maneuverable than his salvage ship. This is Hunting Pack Vexstar, 2 unknown human vessel, came a voice over the communication system. The translation software converted the Zephyrian words to English. You are carrying a criminal wanted for crimes against the honor code. Surrender the traitor. Lyra immediately, and you will be allowed to depart unharmed. Jake looked at Lyra, who was staring at the communication panel with a mixture of fear and anger. That is Captain Vexstar, she said quietly. He was my superior officer on the Silent Honor. He was the one who recommended my execution. What do you want to do? Jake asked. Lyra was quiet for a moment, then her expression hardened. Tell him that I am no longer the frightened junior officer he once knew. Tell him that I have learned what real honor looks like. Jake opened the communication channel. This is Jake Martinez, captain of the Wanderer. I don't recognize your authority out here, and I don't hand over passengers to anyone who asks. You are harboring a war criminal, human. This is your final warning. She saved lives, Jake replied. My book that makes her a hero, not a criminal. The Zephyrian ships opened fire. Energy blasts streaked past the Wanderer, some coming dangerously close. Jake threw the ship into evasive maneuvers, using every trick he had learned during his military service. They are not trying to destroy us yet, Lyra observed, watching the scanner. Vexstar wants to capture me alive, but if we continue to resist, he will eventually decide that killing me is acceptable. Jake dodged another barrage of weapons fire. The Wanderer's shields were holding, but they would not last long against 3 military vessels. There, Lyra said suddenly, pointing at the scanner. That asteroid field ahead, if we can reach it, we might be able to lose them among the rocks. Jake nodded and changed course toward the asteroid field. The Zephyrian ships followed, continuing to fire at them. One blast got through the shields and struck the Wanderer's port engine. Alarms began sounding throughout the ship. Ack! Engine damage, Jake reported, fighting to keep the ship under control. We're losing speed, I can help, Lyra said. She moved to the engineering console and placed her hands on the controls. Once again, Jake watched in fascination as she interfaced directly with the ship's systems. The damage is not too severe, she said after a moment. I can reroute power and stabilize the engine, but it will only give us a few more minutes. The Wanderer limped into the asteroid field with the Zephyrian ships close behind. Jake flew between the massive rocks, using them as cover from the enemy weapons. But the Hunter-class ships were designed for this kind of pursuit. They stayed close, matching his every move. Jake, Lyra said urgently, there is something I have. Not told you about my abilities. When I interface with computer systems, I can sometimes access their communication networks. If I can get close enough to the Zephyrian ships, I might be able to send a message to their fleet command. What kind of message? It's the truth about what happened to the Silent Honor, about why my crew really died. Captain Vexstar told his superiors that the crew died with honor, fighting human forces. He never reported that they were abandoned and left to starve. Jake understood immediately. If you can prove he lied in his official reports, it would destroy his career and reputation. More than that. Lying to Fleet Command about the circumstances of a crew's death is considered one of the most serious crimes in Zephyrian law. He would face execution himself. Another weapons blast struck the Wanderer, this time damaging the navigation system. Jake struggled to maintain control as they weaved between the asteroids. "Do it," he said, "but you'll have to get very close to their ships to access their communication systems." Lyra nodded grimly. "Then get us close to Captain Vextar's ship." It is time he learned what real honor looks like. Jake swung the Wanderer around and flew directly toward the lead Zephyrian vessel. Vextar's ship opened fire immediately, but Jake used the asteroids as cover, approaching from an unexpected angle. "Almost there," Lyra said, her hands already moving across the control panels. "Just a few more seconds." The Wanderer shot out from behind a large asteroid, heading straight for Vextar's ship at maximum speed. Jake could see the Zephyrian vessel, scrambling to bring its weapons to bear, but they were too close and moving too fast. "Now," Lyra said, and her consciousness dove deep into the alien ship's computer network. What she found there would change everything. Lyra's mind raced through the computer systems of Captain Vextar's ship. Her consciousness moved like lightning through databanks and communication networks. What she discovered made her feel sick with rage. "Jake," she said, her voice tight, with anger, "Vextar has been lying about everything. The records on his ship tell a very different story than what he reported to Fleet Command." "What did you find?" Jake asked, still piloting the Wanderer through the dangerous asteroid field. He told his superiors that the Silent Honor died fighting human forces in a heroic last battle, but his personal logs revealed the truth. He ordered the abandonment himself, not because of honor, but because he was afraid that my empathic abilities would expose his own crimes. Jake dodged another asteroid as the Zephyrian ships continued their pursuit. "What crimes?" "Vextar has been selling information about Zephyrian fleet movements to human smugglers. He has caused the deaths of hundreds of his own people for money. When he realized that I might sense his guilt and deception, he decided to eliminate me and my entire crew to protect his secret." "Can you prove it?" "His personal files contain payment records and communication logs with human criminals. I am downloading everything now." Lyra's hands moved rapidly across the control panel. "But there is more. He has been planning to blame me for his own crimes. If he captures me alive, he intends to claim that I was the traitor all along." The lead Zephyrian ship suddenly accelerated, trying to ram the Wanderer. Jake pulled hard on the controls, barely avoiding collision. The enemy vessel passed so close that Jake could see the alien faces on the bridge. "I have what we need," Lyra said. "I am sending the evidence to Zephyrian Fleet Command now, but Vextar's ship is trying to block the transmission." Warning lights flashed throughout the Wanderer as enemy weapons fire struck their rear shields. The ship's defensive systems were failing under the constant attack. "He knows what you're doing," Jake said grimly. "He's going to try to destroy us before the message gets through." "The transmission is almost complete," Lyra replied, sweat beading on her forehead from the effort of maintaining the connection. "Just a few more seconds." Captain Vextar's voice crackled over the communication system. "Clever little Lyra, but your human friend will die for your interference. All weapons, destroy that ship immediately." The three Zephyrian vessels opened fire with everything they had. Energy blasts filled the space around the Wanderer. Jake twisted and turned through the asteroid field using every piece of cover he could find, but there was nowhere left to run. "Got it," Lyra said triumphantly. "The message is sent. Fleet Command will receive the evidence within minutes." A massive weapons blast struck the Wanderer's main engine. Ship shuddered and began spinning out of control. Jake fought with the controls, but they were badly damaged. Emergency alarms screamed throughout the ship. "We're going down," Jake announced, trying to find a safe place to crash land among the asteroids. "There," Lyra pointed to a large asteroid. "With a relatively flat surface, can you reach it?" Jake aimed for the asteroid and fired the ship's emergency thrusters. The Wanderer hit the rocky surface hard, bouncing twice before sliding to a stop against a large boulder. Inside the ship, Jake and Lyra were thrown around like toys, but their safety harnesses kept them from serious injury. "Everyone alive?" Jake asked as the dust settled. "I think so," Lyra replied, checking herself for injuries. "But the ship is not going anywhere." The engines are completely destroyed. Through the cracked viewport, they could see the 3 Zephyrian ships landing. Nearby, armed soldiers began emerging from the vessels, moving toward the crashed Wanderer. "They will kill us both now," Lyra said quietly. "Vexstar cannot allow either of us to live, not after what we have discovered."
Alfie.
Jake pulled out his sidearm and checked the power cell. "Maybe, but I'm not going down without a fight." Lyra looked at him with something like wonder in her dark eyes. "You would die for me? Even now, when you know it is hopeless?" "It's not about dying for you," Jake replied. "It's about living for something that matters. You showed mercy when your people demanded cruelty. You chose truth when they wanted lies. That's worth fighting for." Before Lyra could respond, Captain Vextar's voice echoed across the asteroid surface through external speakers on his ship. "Lyra of the Silent Honor, come out and face your execution with whatever dignity you have left. Your human protector may leave unharmed if he surrenders you immediately." Jake and Lyra looked at each other through the smoke-filled cabin of their wrecked ship. "He is lying," Lyra said. "He will kill you regardless. You know too much about his crimes." "Then we stick together," Jake replied. "Come on, let's see what kind of cards we're really holding." They climbed out of the Wanderer through the damaged airlock. The asteroid's thin atmosphere was breathable, but cold and harsh. Zephyrian soldiers surrounded them, weapons aimed and ready. Captain Vextar stepped forward. He was tall, even for a Zephyrian, with scars across his gray-blue face that spoke of many battles. His uniform was decorated with honors and medals. "So," he said, looking down at Lyra with disgust, "the contaminated one still lives. Your human friend has only delayed the inevitable. The evidence has already been sent to Fleet Command," Lyra said boldly. "They know about your crimes now, Vextar. Your days of betraying our people for human money are over." Vextar laughed, but Jake could hear the nervousness behind it. "You always were too clever for your own good, little Lyra. But even if your message reached Fleet Command, who do you think they will believe? A decorated captain with years of loyal service, or a disgraced traitor who consorts with human scum?" "We'll believe the evidence," Lyra replied. "Payment records, communication logs, battle reports that do not match the official versions. The truth has a way of revealing itself. Perhaps. But you will not live to see it." Vextar raised his weapon, but before he could fire, his communication device began beeping urgently. He answered it with obvious annoyance. "What is it?" Jake could not understand the rapid Zephyrian speech that followed, but he could see Vextar. Expression changed from confidence to worry to outright fear. "Impossible," Vextar said in his own language, then switched back to trade speech. "Fleet Command demands that I return to base immediately for questioning. They say they have received disturbing evidence about my conduct." One of Vextar's soldiers spoke up. "Sir, if Fleet Command is investigating, perhaps we should follow proper procedures and take the prisoners back alive for official questioning." "No," Vextar snapped. "The prisoners die here. That is my final order. But sir, if Fleet Command wants to question them, said they die here." Vextar's voice became desperate. "If anyone who disobeys will be charged with mutiny." Jake watched, with growing hope as Vextar's own soldiers began to look uncertain. They were disciplined military personnel, caught between following orders and obeying Fleet Command. The standoff was broken by the appearance of new ships in the asteroid field. Large vessels with the markings of the Zephyrian Fleet Command dropped out of hyperspace and began landing on the asteroid. "Fleet Admiral Kiktar approaches," one of Vextar's soldiers reported. "She is requesting immediate communication with Captain Vextar." Vextar's face went completely pale. Admiral Kiktar was known throughout the Zephyrian fleet as someone who did not tolerate corruption or dishonor. "Stand down your weapons," came a powerful female voice across the asteroid surface. "This is Fleet Admiral Kiktar. All personnel will maintain their positions until I arrive." Jake felt Lyra's hand slip into his as they watched Admiral Kiktar's shuttle land nearby. A tall, imposing Zephyrian female emerged, flanked by elite fleet soldiers.
"Captain Vextar."
The Admiral said as she approached.
"Vextar."
"You are under arrest for treason, corruption, and the unlawful abandonment of the crew of the Silent Honor. As for you, Lyra of the Silent Honor, The fleet owes you an apology and a debt of honor. Vexstar made one last desperate attempt to draw his weapon, but his own soldiers restrained him. The corrupt captain who had caused so much death and suffering was finally facing justice. Admiral Kiktar turned to Jake and Lyra. The evidence you provided has exposed a network of corruption that reaches far beyond Captain Vexstar. The fleet is grateful for your courage in bringing this matter to light. Jake and Lyra stood together on the cold asteroid, watching as Vexstar was led away in chains. They had survived the hunt, but Jake knew their real journey was just beginning. Fleet Admiral Kiktar stood before Jake and Lyra on the cold asteroid surface. Her elite soldiers had secured the area and were preparing to transport the prisoners back to Zephyrian space. Captain Vexstar sat in restraints, his head hanging in shame as the full weight of his crimes became clear. Lyra of the Silent Honor, Admiral Kiktar said formally, the fleet wishes to make amends for the injustice done to you. Your actions in exposing this corruption have saved countless lives. It will be reinstated with full honors and given command of your own vessel. Lyra looked at the Admiral with respect but shook her head slowly. I am grateful for your words, Admiral, but I cannot return to the fleet. Admiral Kiktar's expression showed surprise. Why not? You have proven your loyalty and honor beyond any doubt, because I have learned something during my time with Jake. Martinez, Lyra replied. I have learned that true honor comes from following your conscience, not from following orders. The fleet may have removed the corruption, but the system that allowed it to happen still exists. Jake watched the exchange with growing concern. He had expected Lyra to return to her people now that she had been cleared of all charges. The thought of her leaving had been painful, but he had accepted it as inevitable. What are you saying? Admiral Kiktar asked. I'm saying that I choose to remain with Jake Martinez. Showed me what real courage looks like when he risked everything to save my life. Together, we want to prove that humans and Zephyrians can work together as equals, not as enemies. The Admiral turned her attention to Jake for the first time. You are the human who harbored a wanted fugitive and interfered with fleet operations. Under normal circumstances, you would face serious charges. Jake straightened his shoulders and met her gaze directly. I did what I thought was right, Admiral. I'd do it again, even though it cost you your ship, your livelihood, and nearly your life. Especially because of that, Jake replied. Some things are more important than personal safety. Admiral Kiktar studied both of them carefully. The war between our peoples has gone on for too long. Too many have died because we refuse to see each other as anything more than enemies. Perhaps it is time for a different approach. She activated a communication device and spoke briefly in rapid Zephyrian. Then she turned back to Jake and Lyra. I'm declaring this asteroid a neutral zone under fleet protection. No human or Zephyrian military vessel may approach without permission. If you truly wish to prove that our species can coexist peacefully, then do so here, where both sides can observe your success or failure. Jake looked around at the barren asteroid surface. Do you want us to build something here? I want you to build hope, Admiral Kiktar replied. Word of what happened here today will spread throughout both fleets. There are others on both sides who are tired of endless war. If you can create a place where humans and Zephyrians work together, others will follow. Lyra stepped forward. What about supplies, equipment? How can we survive on a dead rock in the middle of space? You will not be alone, the Admiral said. Captain Vexstar's corruption network included several smuggling operations that operated in this sector. We are seizing their ships and cargo as evidence. Rather than destroy them, I am granting them to you as the foundation for your settlement. Over the following days, Admiral Kiktar's promise proved true. A steady stream of ships arrived at the asteroid, bringing supplies, equipment, and volunteers from both species. Jake was amazed to see humans and Zephyrians working side by side, unloading cargo and setting up temporary shelters. Among the volunteers was Commander Lisa Stone, Jake's former contact from Colonial Defense. She had resigned her commission after learning about the hunt for Jake and Lyra. The brass wanted to court-martial you for treason, she told Jake as they worked together to assemble a communication array. But when the news broke about what you really did, public opinion shifted pretty quickly. Turns out a lot of people think saving lives is more important than following stupid regulations. Jake wiped sweat from his forehead and looked around at the bustling construction site. I never imagined it would turn into something this big. That's what happens when you give people hope, Lisa replied. Most folks are tired of the fighting. It just needed someone to show them there was another way. Lyra approached them, carrying a datapad filled with technical specifications. The Zephyrian engineers have finished their assessment of the asteroid's mineral deposits. There are enough rare metals here to support a significant manufacturing operation. Manufacturing what? Jake asked. Medical supplies, communication equipment, anything that both sides need but have trouble getting during wartime. We can become a neutral trading post that serves everyone. As weeks turned into months, the small settlement grew into a thriving community. Humans and Zephyrians built homes side by side. Their children played together, and their scientists worked together on projects that benefited both species. Jake found himself serving as an unofficial leader, helping to resolve disputes and coordinate the complex logistics of running a mixed-species colony. Lyra used her empathic abilities to facilitate communication and understanding between different cultural groups. You know, Jake said to Lyra one evening as they stood on the observation deck of their new community center, watching the stars. When I picked up that distress signal, I thought I was just saving one person's life. And instead, you started a revolution, Lyra replied with a smile. Though I think the revolution started when you chose to see me as a person instead of an enemy. Do you ever regret staying? You could have had your own ship, your own command. In the Zephyrian fleet, Lyra shook her head. I have something better. I have a purpose that I chose for myself, not one that was assigned to me. And I have a friend who taught me that courage is not about following orders, but about doing what is right even when it is difficult. Jake looked down at the settlement spread out below them. Humans and Zephyrians were eating together in the community dining hall, their laughter mixing in the recycled air. Children of both species were playing games that combined elements from both cultures. Admiral Keektar was right, he said. This place is spreading hope. I've been getting messages from other sectors, people asking for advice on setting up their own neutral settlements. The war will not end overnight, Lyra warned. There are still those on both sides who profit from the conflict. They will try to stop what we have started here. Let them try, Jake replied confidently. They can destroy ships and stations, but they can't destroy an idea. Once people see that humans and Zephyrians can live together peacefully, there's no going back. A soft chime indicated an incoming message on the colony's communication system. Jake activated the display and saw the face of a young human woman he didn't recognize. This is Captain Emma Walsh of the independent trader Horizon's Edge, the woman said. We're carrying refugees from both sides who are fleeing the war zones. We heard about your colony and we're requesting permission to dock. We have medical supplies and skilled workers to contribute to your community. Jake looked at Lyra, who nodded encouragingly. Permission granted, Captain Walsh, Jake replied. Welcome to Haven Station. You'll find that refugees become citizens pretty quickly around here. As the communication ended, Jake and Lyra continued to watch the stars. Somewhere out there, the war between their peoples continued. Ships fought and died. Soldiers followed orders that perpetuated cycles of violence and hatred. But here on this small asteroid in the middle of nowhere, something different was growing. Something that proved compassion was stronger than conflict, that understanding could overcome fear, and that sometimes the bravest thing one person could do was simply choose to save a life. Jake, Martinez had thought, he was just a salvage operator, picking through the wreckage of war. Instead, he had become the founder of a new kind of future, where the wreckage was rebuilt into something beautiful, and where abandoned souls found new homes among the stars.